For maintenance workers and others who enter people's homes, what's the strangest thing you found inside?
I've encountered some seriously disturbing scenes while working in people's homes. There was one place where the walls and flat surfaces were completely covered with blow-up dolls and adult toys, all hanging from racks or displayed in mirrors. It was everywhere. The house was like a hoarder's nightmare, and to top it off, there were huge bedbugs, squished and smeared, on every wall, ceiling, and flat surface. In the kitchen, a lady was boiling an entire sheep's head on the stove, with various unskinned parts scattered around. To make things even more bizarre, there was an actual Wiccan circle set up on the floor, complete with an altar, candles, and various boxes. Spells were actively being cast. Meanwhile, the person supposed to be cared for, a gambling-addicted caregiver, just sat there in their station while the house fell into complete disarray. Despite the filth, all the collectible items in the home were carefully dusted and cleaned, as if they mattered more than the human in need of care. There was also someone living in a camper with only a water hookup, but the toilet, bath, and sinks were all full of excrement. They refused to have the RV cleaned, dumped, or repaired, even though it could be done for free. The amount of food waste and pet excrement was so extreme that flies bred in mass density, and we were forced to perform services outside. Even then, the person we were there to help was covered in maggots to the point that it took us about 30 minutes to even get started. And I could go on and on with other disturbing stories, but that was definitely one of the worst situations I've seen. When you ask what I do in these circumstances, I get it. You want to know what brought me there. Honestly, I never got to explain it all. It's just that you never expect to see something like this. But there I was. Story 2. I work for a utility company, and one of the tasks I have is relighting appliances after the gas gets shut off. So one day, I walked into a customer's house and asked where the appliances were. He pointed down to the basement without saying a word, just staring at me with this dead-eyed look. It was really awkward, and I had to make my way through a cluttered mess of boxes before heading down to this unfinished basement. Strapped to an old, rickety table was a cat, spread eagle. And yeah, it was clearly dead. But when you're in a customer's house, you just your job and don't ask questions. As I was heading back up, though, I had to ask, "Did you know there's a cat with enforced strapped to your table?" Without looking up from his bowl of Fruit Loops, he just said, "I failed my practical lab for school. I'm practicing mortician." That's when I realized I just had the strangest experience of my life. I made sure to make a note of his address for future workers. Story 3. I used to work with an apartment landlord who had fired the IT guy. Since I was doing some IT work for them, I paid half rent for about 10 hours of work a month. Mostly, it was minor tasks like swapping ports or running cables. Nothing major. But one day, I had to go into an apartment because a tenant complained about his wall jacks. When I walked in, I was hit with an overwhelming smell and immediately saw the place was filthy. The first thing that caught my eye was the mattress room. The floor and walls were completely covered in mattresses, brown, stained, and gross. But it didn't stop there. The back room had these weird cardboard constructions with running computers built into them. Imagine pizza boxes turned into a makeshift computer case. There were 3 separate machines running, and the parts alone must have been worth a few grand. It looked like some kind of open-air mining setup. I was so stunned I didn't know what to think. It completely threw me off, and I started questioning my own sanity. But that wasn't even the weirdest part. Later, I worked for an eviction company in college and helped evict a drug addict. The guy kept his guns safe in his kid's room. My supervisor asked the cop if there were any guns in the house, and the cop replied, "No guns, but maybe $200,000 worth of drugs." My supervisor, without missing a beat, said, "Nah, no way that safe held $200,000 worth of drugs." It wasn't as weird as the cardboard mining setup, but it definitely still made me think. Story 4. I haven't personally experienced it, but I've heard enough stories from police officers and EMTs who've worked in houses inhabited by hardcore drug addicts to know that it's not uncommon to find bizarre adult toys and off-the-wall adult content. I was talking to a police sergeant once, and he said something I'll never forget. Drugs screw up the brain's endorphin receptors to the point where the more addicted someone becomes, the wilder the stuff they need to do to feel any pleasure. That's why it often leads to even crazier toys and adult content being involved. When I read some of these other stories, I started to wonder why there was such an overlap between drug abuse and these adult toy situations. It's something I never really connected before, but it made total sense once I thought about it. Thanks for the insight, Opie. Story 5. I was tasked with doing a renovation in an apartment after an eviction, and I was the first person into the place once they left. The living room was piled high with garbage, about 4 feet high. Sadly, that's not an unusual sight after an eviction. But what really hit me hard was the first bedroom. It was obviously a kid's room, and the walls were covered in drawings. From the height of the drawings, I could tell the kids were probably no older than 4 or 5. The closet smelled like urine, and I noticed the door had the knob turned around so it locked from the outside. It was clear that they'd been locking the kids in a room. I couldn't just let it go, so I took pictures and sent them to the building manager to pass on to the authorities. I don't know what came of it, but it still haunts me. Story 6. I worked for 2 different property preservation companies from 2006 to 2017, mostly handling single-family foreclosures. Most of the time, I just look at photos of the properties taken by our contractors, but sometimes the stories were pretty unbelievable. There was this one property where the toilet had broken, but instead of fixing it, they just laid a tarp down around it and kept piling crap on top of it until it was about 2 feet high. That wasn't even the worst of it, though. At another property, there was a trench, at least 20 to 30 feet long and 3 to 5 feet wide, filled with whole and partial deer corpses. And then there was the cow that got into a vacant property, ate all the baseboards and stairs, and got stuck in the bathroom. It must have been trapped in there for at least a month or 2 before someone found it, completely decayed into the floor. There was also a cage at one property, but I don't think we need to go into that. And the most bizarre thing? A house with a freaking jail cell built into the corner of the garage. We figured it had something to do with human smuggling, but we never heard any details about it. Honestly, there were so many strange properties I visited that I've lost count. Story 7. It wasn't part of my job description, but as a generic IT guy, I was once ordered by the CEO of the small company I worked for to go to his house and set up his cable and internet. The following events unfolded. His beauty queen wife, in her early 40s and with a lot of surgeries, met me at the door in her bathrobe, though she had reasonable nightwear underneath. She and her husband were in the middle of a divorce, and according to office gossip, she was a little drunk at 10 a.m., nothing unusual for her. She flirted with me a few times, but I'm not exactly someone people would look twice at, so I'm pretty sure she's sobered up enough to pass on it. I entered the room where his son kept all his gadgets. It was late 2000s, and the kid had every expensive item a teenager could want. The room was a disaster, with stuff scattered everywhere, stuff I couldn't afford. His 15-year-old daughter was passed out drunk on the couch, with a half-empty bottle of wine beside her and a blanket covering her face. Like her mother, she had a known drinking problem. I connected everything, set up the wireless, and called the cable company. It took me about 2 hours, but honestly, I felt so dirty being in that house. You can't unsee the wreckage that happens when horrible people get too much money. Story 8. For a summer job, I worked for an appliance delivery and installation company. We'd go inside with the new machines, hook them up, and remove the old ones. One day, my coworker and I were installing a dishwasher for a guy who had to be in his 60s. While I was hooking up the drain hose, my coworker was taking the old unit outside. The guy casually says to me, "When you called, I was practicing my hobby. I'm an escape artist." I knew this could get weird fast, so I didn't ask any questions. When my coworker came back in, the guy took out a set of handcuffs and told him, "Put these on me and I'll get out." He left the room, and minutes later, was free. Then he asked my coworker to tie his arms up and cuff him again. Once again, he left the room and was free minutes later. This was our last stop, and we just wanted out of there. I finished installing the dishwasher while he got the paperwork ready. I told him I'd load the junker into the truck and wait. About 10 minutes later, my coworker comes out and says, You gotta see what this guy had me do. I went in, and the guy was in handcuffs, tied up in a sleeping bag, with a moving blanket duct taped around him. We waited in the kitchen, and about 5 minutes later, he came out free and sweating like crazy. It was actually kind of impressive, and he seemed pretty happy with the whole thing. It was the weirdest experience on the job. Honestly, you usually have to go to Vegas for something like that. Did I just deliver an appliance to Houdini? Story 9. I work as a solar installer, and one day we were setting up a system on an outbuilding at a home that had a lot of sport bikes in the driveway and a couple of four-wheelers. The place had some Dale Earnhardt memorabilia in the building, along with leather love seats, jackets, and even a full stock car. While we were on the roof, a garbage truck pulled up to empty the dumpster. The driver waved, not trying to be unfriendly, and we waved back. He came over and introduced himself as the homeowner. Randy Johnson vibes, mullet, big mustache, and fast-looking sunglasses. He explained how to get to the restroom and said we could grab some Mountain Dew from the soda machine in his room. When I went to use the restroom, I noticed more NASCAR stuff, camo bedspread, and hunting photos. On my way back, I grabbed a Mountain Dew from the vending machine. That's when I saw it, a 6x10 wall covered in gay adult DVDs and VHS tapes. Now, I'm not trying to shame anyone for their preferences, but there's a gap in my mind between NASCAR, Mountain Dew, and hunting and, well, homosexuality. Story 10. I work in home health, and one morning, while brushing one of my patients' hair, I put the brush down on a side table to braid her hair. She then asked me, Wait, go to my dresser and get my hair bag, please. I asked, What's a hair bag? And walked over to her dresser. She said, Open it up, you'll see. Sure enough, there sat a Ziploc bag full of clumps of hair. She asked me to pull the hair from the brush and put it in the bag. When I asked her why she was saving it, she said, I've been saving my hair since I was a girl. It's all in the closet. Go look, it's beautiful. I opened the closet, and there it was, an entire shelf lined with Ziploc bags, each full of hair. There were dozens of bags, ranging from dark brown to light brown, and then shades of gray and white. Beautiful? Not exactly the word I would have used. Story 11. I worked as a computer tech in my early 20s in the rural Midwest, and I have a lot of stories from those days, but here are the highlights. I went to a hog farm to fix a camera system, and what I found was footage of the pens, which had toilets and beds in them. Another time, I was called to an apartment to install a camera. The apartment had nothing in it except a bench press, where the dining table should have been, and bedroom furniture. I spent about 30 minutes setting up a cheap Chinese hidden camera while the guy stood behind me, breathing heavily, praying I didn't stumble onto something I wasn't supposed to see. Later, I went to another house in the city. The old dude's sister, or whoever she was, started telling me the future was coming, and she had seen me in a dream. Then, when I was finishing up, she came out naked and tried to take my hand. She wanted to spit on it. I was like, hell no, I don't want to die here. She was a 7 out of 10, but no way was it worth the risk. I've also discovered that way too many people, teachers, judges, cops, and doctors, have a disturbing collection of fake snuff films, torture, and adult content. They always present themselves as perfect, conservative people, but it's insane how often I've found this hidden history. The lesson? Never trust conservatives. Story 12. I worked with my dad for a few years at his appliance business. He would do sales, repairs either in the shop or clients' homes, and deliveries. One time, me and my dad walked into this apartment that we had to do a service for due to their dryer going out. We walked in, and the first thing we noticed was the harsh smell of weed in the air and 2 couches in the living room, both being occupied. One couch had a gentleman smoking his lungs off, and the other had a guy who was passed out cold with a lighter in his hand. A guy, who I'm assuming was her husband, was sitting at the dinner table right in front of the dryer we were going to be working on, and the whole time, this lady is in our ear yelling at us that the dryer isn't working and that the last time we came out to fix it, all we did was spray WD-40 on it. But mind you, this is the first time anybody from the company has been called to her house. But she insisted it was someone from my dad's business who did it. My dad at this point is trying to talk her down and tell her that the only time we've dealt with her is when we sold her the unit, but she's not having it, yelling at us with the smell of weed on her breath. And at this point, her husband got angry, so he's over here threatening to assault us. Then the couple's 12-year-old comes out talking smack, and they followed us all the way to our car when we drove off. And that was that. Story 13. I install blinds and curtains. So far, the weirdest thing I've seen in 5 years would be a woman who decorated the entire second floor of her home with pictures and posters of Hugh Jackman. Movie posters, newspaper clippings, photos of him and her at fan meet and greets. I counted over 30 posters, well over 100 framed photos, and many of them being signed. Stacks and stacks of the playbills you get at the door, but only of plays that he was in. Look, of all the obsession to have, I'm not saying I get it, but I do not get it. Story 14. A woman bought 2 new triple pane sliders with impact glass, expensive. The whole interior of the house is stripped to the studs. She's flipping it. The kitchen sink was a 5-gallon bucket under a spigot. The actual kitchen sink was in the living room with the dirty dishes in it, just on the floor.
Didn't make sense.
Probably 4 or 5 cats living there. Had to go back about 6 months later, and it was nearly the same. Kitchen sink was still on the floor, house interior was still stripped to the studs. Pretty unbelievable. Story 15. Worked EMS for a spell. My partner needed to use the bathroom before we transported a stable elderly patient. Using the bathroom in a patient's house is widely regarded as an oh crap. No, I'd rather crap on myself because A, people are gross, and B, people are weird. This particular old lattice house is clean, albeit decorated with many creepy figurines, but my partner was on a juice cleanse and couldn't hold it, so he decided to hit the can. I asked him to look around to see if any of her meds were in the bathroom, because she's unclear of the name of her BP medicine, and I wanted to have a complete list for the ED. He comes out alarmed as hell, and just points. The little old lady had one of those tall storage racks above her toilet with 3 or 4 shelves. Every single one of those shelves was filled with rows and rows of jars, and each jar was jam-packed with nail clippings. Absolutely packed. It was freaking revolting to just see bits and bits of yellow brittle nails just chilling in the open for anyone to see. Story 16. I don't think I've seen too many weird things compared to just gross. I've seen 500-pound brothers who are hoarders, and their house was stacked beyond belief with trash. They could barely move due to their weight alone, and when you throw in all the objects, it was that much harder. We would get called up to their house all the time because one of them would trip and fall and couldn't get up. Had a lady have a heart attack while she was pleasuring herself, and she was naked on the couch with a bunch of lube and fake dongs on the floor. When I was in California, there were countless druggies whose houses were just 5 inches thick of animal feces and cockroaches. Prior paramedic. Story 17. I used to have to do home visits for families with preschoolers. This was in a tiny apartment where the kids had no beds and slept on mattresses on the floor with no sheets. One wall of the living room was a massive fish tank. The other side of the wall was a massive flat-screen TV. Each item took up the entire wall on its side. I was in another apartment where there were tons of kittens, 1 giant cage, and nothing else, no litter box and no furniture. I have no idea where the kids slept or why there were so many kittens. They were cooking there. There were pots and pans and food on the stove, but it was so bizarre. One of the reasons for home visits was to determine eligibility for services like furniture vouchers, for example, or Medicaid. But the main reason was so we could make sure the kid could go to our free program because it was only available to residents of the city. At least, if you're lying about living in a place, have some of the kid stuff in there. Story 18. My cousin and I went to inquire about a sofa for sale in an apartment building. The man who answered the door was an older gentleman. He greeted us and told us that he was selling all the things in his apartment because his wife died and he was going to move to California to live with his girlfriend. We asked about the sofa he had for sale, and he said it was in his bedroom. So we walked into his bedroom, and there were whips and handcuffs on his bed, as well as an exercise bike with restraints on the handles and foot pedals. We looked at the sofa very quickly and told him it wasn't what we were looking for and left the apartment as fast as we could. It was quite obvious he was into some wild stuff. We wanted nothing to do with the sofa he was selling. Now, usually I would say, hey, let people do what they're going to do, but in this scenario, if you're buying a sofa, yeah, maybe don't. Fair enough. Story 19. I used to work as an in-home therapist for children with autism. Before starting a session, I would set up the necessary paperwork for about 15 minutes. I could hear a strange buzzing coming from the living room, but this kid had tons of toys, so I paid no mind to it. He usually kept himself busy with his toys until I could hang out with him. Once I finished, I headed over to meet him in the living room, and I was shocked when I finally realized what the buzzing was. Homeboy had somehow found his oldest sister's vibe and was straight up turning it on and off, smacking it against the floor and all his toys. I didn't know how to react and was just kind of giggling, asking him what he was playing with. Sure enough, sister hears the commotion and comes down, completely embarrassed, scolding him to not take things from her room. We both just pretended it didn't happen. Story 20. I clean 4 homes in my area every summer. One time, I went into this guy's cabin to get it all cleaned up before he got home. I walked into the living room and could smell nothing but peanut butter, a super, super strong smell. That's when I noticed there was peanut butter on the wall. So, like an idiot, I followed it. I reached the bathroom and found an entire jar of peanut butter smeared everywhere over everything. I figured the guy must have had a toddler or something. However, there were no kids' clothes, no toys, no pictures, so I started to get to work until I saw the rubber sitting in the bathroom garbage covered in peanut butter. I left and have not been back since. Story 21. Electrician here. I did some remodels in Section 8 housing as an apprentice. The most amazing thing was the swing between people who kept immaculate apartments and ones that were just infested with garbage and bugs. The worst was a filthy one. Reefer, 2 cracked-out women on the couch. When we came in, we explained what we needed to do, but no one cared. While we were working, someone pounded on the door. When the tenant opened it, 3 men came in, picked up one of the women on the couch, and pistol-whipped the living crap out of her. Nothing we could have done, even if we wanted to. We had to hang out and wait for the cops to come and give a statement. That was a bad day. Story 22. Fort Myers Beach, Florida. A wealthy German greets me at the door in his underwear at a waterfront condo, apologizes for the underwear, and walks away, pointing to the TV right by the door saying some channels didn't work. There was a woman sitting at a kitchen table that he passed. I assumed he walked away to get dressed, so I start to diagnose the issue with his cable. All appears good to me when he walks back with a cup of coffee, still only in his underwear, whitey-tighty, for those who are wondering. I explain that everything is fine with the signal and ask what channels are affected. Quickly determined it was for some special Playboy channels that expired. I tried to excuse myself quickly when I noticed that the woman I thought was at the kitchen table was actually a mannequin. As he was signing off that all was well with his TV, he kept asking me if I liked Asian girls as an Asian softcore movie was playing on his TV. Story 23. Used to be a massage therapist that took house calls. I once went to a very well-to-do neighborhood and the 12-bedroom house that came with it. The job was a simple hour-long stress relief massage. I get there, and an older woman who is still quite attractive greeted me in a very short, revealing robe. No issue, as most of my clients went nude anyway. I do wish it was done in a more professional way. She leads me to the front room, which was huge. The first thing I notice is above the fireplace, a huge hand-painted oil painting of a dog, those white fluffy ones. Wow, okay, that was probably an expensive paint job. I'm led to the room where I will perform the massage. The room was made for a dog. It was a small round dog bed, complete with a frame and steps. It even had a small kid dresser that looked like it was for dog clothes, as well as a small dog chest with toys, pictures of dogs, and parks on the wall. It even had an attached bathroom. I did not go in there. I set up my table and braced myself, and yep, I was asked to massage the dog as apparently it was very stressed out. I think the dog was just comfortable to the point of lazy, but hey, what do I know? You know what? Rich people, spend your money on whatever you want. If you want to get your dog a massage, go for it, I guess. Story 24. Worked for an architect who had been hired by a building owner to do extensive renovations of his apartment building. To do so, we needed to create floor plans for the entire building, but he didn't have any, so we had to survey the entire building and every apartment in order to draft the plans ourselves. We gained access to one of the apartments and were greeted by a friendly tenant. As we step into the apartment, I just see dongs everywhere. He had dong art all over his apartment. Paintings of dongs, photos of dongs, statues of dongs. I put my head down and just started doing my work, trying to get out of there as efficiently as possible. My colleague, who was straight out of college at that point, was just rattled by the whole thing. When we finally left, the only words he muttered under his breath were, "So many dongs." Story 25. By far the weirdest dude I've ever helped was this bodybuilder who was having a bunch of home theater crap installed in his house. He absolutely would not use Wi-Fi because he believed it was dangerous and wanted everything in the house wired. There were 4 of us on the job. We get there, and he takes us to the basement, where there are signs everywhere about radiation and to wear protection when certain equipment is running. Dude has a tanning bed and a bunch of chemicals that I can only assume were for making steroids or something of that sort. But remember, Wi-Fi is dangerous. Oh, and also a vibe, but that's not even on our radar at this point. Later, he asks if we mind if he goes on a walk, and we're like, sure, man, do whatever. About 10 minutes later, we realize he's naked in a field behind his house doing Tai Chi due to his neighbors, and he's not that far away from people to be doing that. Toward the end of the appointment, we're setting up an account for something, and he needs to create a password. He asks me how my name is spelled, and uses my name as a password. My name isn't unusual, but it is a name that can be spelled many ways, so I'm sure that worked super well for him. We finally finish and are just about to get the hell out of there when suddenly he darts out of the house and waves us down. He apparently has a tradition of letting guests choose a marble from a table filled with marbles. We all pick a marble just to appease him. He tells me I can have a second if I like, but I decline on account of not wanting to make my coworkers jealous. Story 26. A guy going at himself with a dong spread eagle. He didn't even hear us knocking since he had headphones on. He began to do dishes for whatever reason as we fixed his bathroom sink. A girl, with nothing on but a button-up shirt, would bend over and reach for stuff too. I'm guessing, flash us the entire time. I thought to myself, there's a camera somewhere in this house recording me right now. Walking into a couple banging and adult content playing on their TV. Also had a girl take feet pics and bang a guy over the phone as we fixed her ceiling fan. Multiple drug use, walk-ins, domestic abuse, multiple naked people walking out of their shower. A room covered in fresh poop in every corner of the room, on baseboards, all over the carpet. Kind of everything, to be honest. Story 27. For a short period of time, I worked for a popular tech support company, and sometimes our clients would schedule appointments for one of us to come into their homes and work on their computers, printers, whatever. During our training, another agent was telling a story about the worst house he'd ever been to for an in-home, and it is as follows. He knocked on the door only to be greeted by the sound of many locks unlocking, and the client just barely opened the door enough to speak with the agent. Feeling that things were a little off, he came back to the facility, only to be told to return to the house. Upon his return, the gentleman was more open to letting the agent enter his home. When the agent walked in the door, the entire house was covered in crap from head to toe. The man was wearing a tuxedo that was also covered in crap. The agent made a 180 and returned to his car, and the client was no longer allowed to schedule in-home appointments. Story 28. Delivery guy here. I don't really go inside people's homes, but I do go to their front doorstep. I went to this one huge house before, and the guy who opened the door was not what I expected. He was obviously a drug user, and hey, I've got no problem with that as long as you don't affect my life. Do whatever you want. He opened the door, had baggy eyes, long brown hair, and was really skinny. He signed the check and gave me $15, which was nice, but what I saw in the house was freaking crazy. But also kind of cool, I guess. I saw a TV that was bigger than anything I've ever seen in my life. He had a painting on the wall, as well of what looked like a younger version of him, and what I'm guessing were his parents. It was obviously painted, but it looked really nice. Story 29. Parole officer here. I supervise parolees in one of the worst areas in North Philadelphia. I've seen my fair share of weird, crazy stuff, but this one takes the cake. A few months ago, I entered a home in which one of my parolees was requesting to live. Each home has to be approved by parole staff, and it must be searched top to bottom for anything that could possibly set off red flags or become a violation of parole. So I entered this home, and the first thing that stood out was the intense smell of chemicals. I mean, it was so intense, the smell hit me like a train as I walked inside. There was a large 10-gallon trash can, multiple boxes, and various other trash cans, all completely filled with empty Clorox bottles, CLR bottles, and other cleaners. All the furniture in the room was moved towards the walls. There were 3 large dog crates all stacked up in the kitchen, as well as a very expensive dog treadmill. Hanging onto the banister of the staircase were bolt cutters, chains of all sizes, and multiple dog collars. There was also container upon container full of dog food and multiple pallets of wet dog food. As I proceeded up the stairs, there were large claw marks going all the way up the stairwell and something that closely resembled blood splatter. The list goes on from there, but you get the gist. I fully believed I walked in on a dog fighting ring. Extremely sad. Also, in the backyard, there were 2 bull terriers chained up. Don't worry, I did report my findings to the SPCA. Well, that's a crappy one to end on. That kind of just bums me out. I don't know how else I'm supposed to feel about animal abuse. It's weird for sure, like you never expect to see that, so it fits the prompt. But man, I'm just kind of sad now. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.